Okay, welcome. Thank you so much for attending. Welcome to the 2021 Sunstone Symposium session 274. How about doubt? Its meaning, history, management, utilization, and benefits. At Sunstone, we are making it a goal to build a community that allows many ways for people to express their faith. Our tagline is, "There is more than one way to Mormon." We invite you to help us build a community where all paths are given space to be better understood. Please support us in our mission by making a donation and subscribing at sunstone.org. After the symposium, Sunstone staff will edit, polish, and re-upload all of this year's session videos to the Huva app. Sorry, I should have looked up how to pronounce that. It takes about 2 weeks for everything to be available, but once it is, every video will be available to watch and re-watch in the app through the end of 2021. Please type any questions into the Huva app to be addressed during the Q&A, or if you're watching in person, we'll open the audience mic for questions at the end as time allows. About this presentation, this session will be discussing doubt, its meaning and history in religion, its management, how we can utilize it, and how it can even be beneficial. I'll take a second to introduce you to our speakers before we begin. D. Jeff Burton is the author of Sunstone's longest running column, Braving the Borderlands. He also published the first book to address faith crises called For Those Who Wonder, which went through 3 printings. Stephen Carter is the director of publications for the Sunstone Education Foundation and a host for the Sunstone podcast. He is the recipient of 3 Association for Mormon Letters awards, one in the essay, graphic novel, and anthology categories. I'll now give the floor to our presenters.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. Again, in person. I'll take this off so I can talk to them. Yeah, so today we're talking about doubt, its meaning, its history, and its management, how we can utilize it, and how it might even be beneficial to us. It can be a useful tool when it's used properly, as you know. Let's ask ourselves some basic questions. So the first question is, what is doubt anyway? At its core, doubt means having questions, being skeptical about something, not being ready to fully accept or believe something, or not having enough evidence to assure confidence in the reality of something. Think what it means in science, in science research. I'm on the adjunct faculty at the University of Utah Department of Family and Preventive Medicine, and sometimes we have to evaluate some medications and things. But if we wanted to see if it's okay to dispense a new medication, we perform studies and evaluate the results using statistical significance testing. Let's say the results come back with a 97% confidence level that it's safe for people to take this medication. The other 3%, what does that represent? Well, that's kind of our doubt. That's some small level of doubt that we have to be aware of, because nothing in this world is perfect. 97% is pretty good for a medication, but some level of doubt is pretty common in all the sciences and in life too. So let's ask some more questions. First of all, who doubts things and when? These are simple questions and they have pretty easy answers. Frankly, in life, everyone has doubts about things. I've never met anyone who didn't have a doubt about something, even when it meant that they were doubting what I was saying to them, that kind of thing. For almost everyone, anytime we hear something new, a little doubt is generated in our minds as a protection, just in case, Someone says, I just came from the store, they're giving away milk. Our first typical response is like, really? Why? For free? Is it outdated milk? Why would they give away milk? What's the gimmick here? That's our regular safety doubt coming up. And think about this, a few things are certain in this life. There's always margins for error or imperfect outcomes. And so, that's one way of looking at doubt. But as we know, doubt has a negative connotation in some areas of life, especially as it applies to religion. In our LDS religious setting, if the question arose, is tea really bad for you to drink? The evidence I've seen myself suggests that it's safe and could even be beneficial for some when taken in moderation. But this is certainly not conclusive data. And in my mind, there are some questions, some skepticism, and some wondering and doubts about tea being banned in our religion. So that's an example of religious doubt. For me, even though I have technical reservations and doubts about the tea ban, I go along and avoid drinking tea. That makes me what we call a faithful doubter. Who knows, maybe there's something negative we don't know about tea. It makes me more of an acceptable member in the eyes of some. You know, it's part of being LDS is to avoid coffee and tea and so forth. So in the face of doubt, we can exercise faith and go along if we want to. Other terms for faithful doubters could include faithful wonderers, active disbelievers, closet doubters, hopeful doubters, and the yet uncertain. You'll hear all kinds of terms. So let's explore a few questions about this topic. First, what do the scriptures have to say about it? You may be surprised. I was. The first scriptural reference about doubt that comes to most minds is the doubting Thomas story. In John chapter 20, we read about Thomas, one of the 12 apostles. He apparently wasn't with the others when Jesus first came to visit them after his resurrection. And Thomas later talked to them about Jesus appearing to them. And he asked them questions that showed he had some doubts as to whether it really was Jesus or not. You know, a perfectly acceptable response given the circumstances. You know, someone coming back to life after they've died? Who's heard of that kind of thing? He'd likely never heard of such a thing before. But paraphrasing his thoughts and conclusions in the scriptures, he said to the others something like, written in our language, unless I see the nail and marks in his hands, unless I can put my own hand on his side wound, I couldn't believe it was him. Then as described in the next few verses, Jesus comes to the group and says to Thomas something like, put your finger here and see my hands, touch my side. And after doing that, Thomas has had enough evidence and says, my Lord, my God, it's you, something like that. Then Jesus says to him, because you have now seen me, you have believed. That seems obvious and reasonable, doesn't it? And Jesus is also reported to have said, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. So he suggests that claims made by trusted people can be more easily believed. The 12, they should be trusted by eyewitnesses of him and so forth. We have to recognize that Jesus did not say, blessed are those who have not yet seen and yet know. He didn't use the word know. By belief, Jesus, in my mind, means more than the idea of acceptance, more the idea of acceptance and faith in what Thomas had been told by the 12. The idea is that Thomas's questioning and wondering if it was Jesus was okay. If he went along and accepted with faith the idea or the claim that Jesus was being alive, as he was told by trusted eyewitnesses. So there's some suggestion here that in religion, faith in the face of doubt can be useful when it is important to us. Other stories from the scripture suggest to some that Jesus himself was an occasional doubter. Really? Jesus? Let's ask a weird question. Did Jesus himself ever show any signs of doubt or wondering about his religious mission and purpose in life? If it's true that he did, then the rest of us certainly can reasonably feel less pain and guilt if we've experienced episodes of questioning, wondering, and doubting in circumstances where sufficient objective evidence is lacking. So asking the question again, did Jesus himself ever show any doubts about his mission and purpose? Seems like maybe he did. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, for example, we have the story of Jesus and his disciples in Gethsemane after their Passover meal. Probably remember this scripture. Jesus, who is described as feeling sorrowful and troubled, prays to God and is reported to have said something like, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, I will do as you will. Sounds like he had some questions and even some doubts about the need for his great upcoming sacrifice. Wow. And then again on the cross, after suffering for many hours, Jesus says to God, why have you forsaken me? That's in the scripture. Again, he sounds like he might have doubted that God was treating him fairly. Now, as an aside, I know there are different interpretations of these stories, but to me, it does sound like a common form of doubting and questioning. And I wouldn't blame Jesus one bit if he did, given the circumstances. So if you have doubts about God's plan for you or other religion-related things, just remember that you're not alone. Most, if not all, people do. Maybe even Jesus did too. Who knows for sure? But he eventually accepted the situations he was in and went along. And that's a good lesson for us. Use faith when appropriate and necessary. Okay, let's return to and explore further the concept of an LDS faithful doubter. I'll continue with some of my own experiences. Early in my first mission to Japan, I chanced upon a very active but genuine doubter about the Joseph Smith story. It was my first encounter with a faithful doubter. She was serving in the young women's leadership and was extremely active in our Sendai branch. I'd been talking to her about bringing her non-member friends to church, and in the course of our conversation, learned the secret of her questions and her disbeliefs. I thought at the time that, this faithful doubter must be a rarity. But it was like learning a new word. What I first thought was rare, I soon recognized all around me. Since that day, I've had the opportunity to cautiously identify and speak confidentially with a very large number of people who have invisible memberships in this group. In fact, you'd be surprised how many. And I've been asked how I find them. It's simple. I had to ask or invite tactfully and at the proper time the generally taboo questions. Do you have any questions about anything in the church? Or do you have any doubts or issues or that you could share with me? Get somebody aside and talk to them privately. And many do have something to say if they're at a point where they can be open and honest with themselves and with us. Many of their stories are described in the 64 plus Borderland columns I've written for Sunstone. Every one of those has a doubter in there almost. By the way, you can see all of those columns on my website for those who wonder. It's named after my book, For Those Who Wonder. So you just go to forthosewhowonder.com and you can download any of those columns. And you can also download my book if you'd like to have a copy of my book. It was first published or distributed by Deseret Book, but they don't carry it anymore, of course. But you can get a copy of that if you just go to my website. You can download that for free too. Among those I have written about in my columns, some trends have appeared. They tended to be mature, educated, well-read. Most had studied the scriptures and appear knowledgeable about church history. Many came from strong church backgrounds. They were often the offspring of traditional LDS parents, or they had been committed converts themselves. Some had served missions and others had married in the temple. Many have had close and important ties to the church, such as church callings or even church employment. Not long ago, I talked to a fellow from BYU employee there who's got some problems like this. Most, although feeling doubts, expressed commitments to the goals, principles, and practices of today's LDS culture and church. They may be in the borderlands, according to the way I think, but they're still in the church. They often stated their reason for staying these ways. The basic principles of the church come from the Bible, and those are not the invention of Joseph Smith. And they say, principles of love, caring, sharing, kindness, honesty, integrity, sacrifice are universal, true, noble, believable, Christian, and worthy of support. They're not just Mormon stuff only. And they'll say programs of education, health, public service, and helping the needy are also worth supporting, things the church does. And I love being with my friends and family at church, stuff like that. I used to talk to them so much, I put some in that. Some said the church may not be true in the one and only true church sense, but there's nothing better for me. Few expected to find any true church. And in fact, most were not looking. They were mostly settled, faithful doubters, our borderland people. Although not untroubled, but they seemed to be relatively happy, fulfilled people with little hint of hate or vindictiveness. Living in the borderlands of the church. This serenity is remarkable given the anguish some experienced during their deconversions. Before finally admitting to their doubts, many experienced an agonizing transition period, sometimes measured in years, and often filled with insecurities, other problems, alienation, sometimes anger, confusion, all those kind of things. Maybe you understand what they're talking about. But this transition state was sometimes accompanied by feelings of guilt. I mustn't feel this way. Or I shouldn't have felt critical of such and such. Or I get upset reading church history. Why do I keep doing it? And there were feelings of denial. Of course I believe. It's just a test. Or I've got to stop thinking this way. People went through these steps as they went through their doubting stages. There were feelings of denial. Feelings of shame. What kind of a sinner must I be, having all these doubts? Or feelings of anger. Why me? Why did God pick me? Kind of thing. This is just when you're getting in those first stages of feeling doubt. And of course, feelings of loneliness. I'm the only one with these thoughts and problems. There's no one else who understands. They don't realize they're sitting right next to them in church as somebody just like them. So anyway. Given these emotional conflicts, it is not hard to understand why some actually sought professional counseling. Yes, some do. After finally facing up to the fact of their questions and doubts, most said they felt an odd sense of relief and a freedom not felt during the transition. They said things like, the truth has finally made me free, and free agency finally means something. Most felt good in making a free choice to participate, without the guilt that hovered over them during the transition. They're more than happy to be in the borderlands, the people I talked to. It might be possible to fly, but here's another important reason some stayed at first. Some faithful doubters feel tied to the church as birds are to Mother Earth. It may be possible to fly high, but gravity eventually has its way with every bird. These pressures and gravitational ties that held them to the church while they went through their first stages of being doubtful included being married to a believing spouse. She'd be so nervous if she knew. The desire to give children strong and stable support. They need the church in their lives. Family traditions and history. It would hurt my mother if I went inactive. Job security and pension programs for those people who are employed by the church or BYU. A social life revolving around friends who are believers. How do you attend your friend's temple wedding if you're inactive? And of course, inner fear. The official Joseph Smith story might be true after all. And then some borderlands justified their continued activity as contributing to improvements in church practices they considered weak, strong, or embarrassing.
Jeff, it seems like you're not as loud as you were, and you never were really that loud.
Okay, I'll talk a little over here. They often mention, they were justified their continued activity as doing practice, helping. They mentioned things like trying to do something to improve the temple ceremony, talking about improving women's rights, stress on unquestioning obedience, getting better vertical dialogue between local members and the general leaders, and doing something about the lack of transparency in the church with regards to the money they collect from us. One of my most recent people I talked to, that was his issue. What are they doing with all that money I'm giving to them? They should be helping people, because they need to know more about what's actually happening there. But here are a few more thoughts about faithful doubters I've known. They often keep their interpretation hidden. Sometimes even spouses don't even know the extent of their doubts. So why the need for such secrecy? There's secrecy. First, there's the fear of being ostracized, or worse, put in the handle with care category, reserved for investigators and questioners. Mainstream believers often remain aloof and feel uncomfortable around those who ask too many questions or demonstrate a doubting nature. And more seriously, some believing members often interpret a rejection of their beliefs as a rejection of themselves. So people have had to feel, I got to be really careful about what I tell people, what I let people know about what I think. The second main reason for secrecy is the fear that their chance for meaningful church participation might be reduced. Many more than just a few worried that unsympathetic bishop might deny them a temple recommend. Or several I've talked to have confided in bishops who have been supportive and understanding. That happened to me that way several times. The church has said it can tolerate divergent beliefs as long as those beliefs are held personally and no attempt is made to sway others. Another reason for secrecy in a way. This can be interpreted, I mean, please keep your doubts to yourself. A lot of people do interpret it that way. Finally, many of the borderlands have expressed the thought it is not their place to alter the beliefs of others. Coming out of the closet may be too great a shock for those whose testimonies rely on the strength of others' beliefs. So let's shift gear here. I know it's sometimes difficult for faithful but secret doubters to come out of their closets, but I encourage, secret doubters to prepare themselves and their families for that eventual step. My own experience has been positive in my lifetime. I tell the truth about me and my thinking, and I often get the response, "Oh, Jeff, you believe more than you think," things like that, and so forth. Just a few years ago, I was called on a service mission with a church's risk management group. Now, I wasn't doing any proselyting or anything. My mission involved their environmental work, such as controlling mold in church buildings in hot and humid climates, and working with environmental people. And I had an office downtown, right in the church office building. That's what they were willing to give me. They didn't seem to care that I wasn't a testimony bearing member or that I was associated with Sunstone. They were fine with that. So next time you think about getting a temple recommend or accepting a ward calling or even being called as a missionary, keep my own experiences in mind. Okay, let's explore one more question. What impact do faithful doubters have on the church? There's no way of knowing for sure except to observe that many of doubters are involved in events at the local level, and because of their education skills, they often have positions of leadership, bishoprics and so forth. I've been on 2 bishoprics. I've been an LDS branch president. I've served 2 missions. That's me, a doubter, a faithful doubter. So people are willing to take you if you go along. The church's correlation department has conducted systematic investigations of belief, faith, and activity among active members. Results have not been made available to the general public, but they've shared a few things with me. They actually called me downtown to talk to me about it one time. And I'm confident the church is not totally ignoring the problems of skepticism and doubting. For example, I've actually had contact from Apostle Jeffrey Holland about these issues. He's a great guy. The last letter he sent to me, he signed "The Other Jeff." I don't tell people that. He's a great guy. But right now, it's my sense that the extent of skeptical thinking is expanding, particularly among the youth of the church and those controlled by the social media. So we need to be more attentive to these issues at every level of the church. So let me close by asking one last question. What are the potential benefits of doubt? This is probably the best question we've got to answer. First, doubts encourage us to ask questions, search for information, find answers, find truth, and frankly, just be curious. All these are good things. So say somebody tells you today that, hey, it's going to snow next weekend. What's our first thought? Snow in August? Are you kidding? We would naturally question and doubt that forecast, and we can get information about the forecast by looking at snow records in August and by looking at the official weather forecast for the weekend and the location and so forth. So, the research on our part can help us answer the questions even with our doubts. So that's an important part of life. Another benefit in our religious lives, doubt can put your faith through a test. You'll come out stronger for it. Doubt forces us into action. No one likes doubtful thoughts to linger, so we're self-encouraged to find out something about it, even if our conclusions are negative. So we've made progress for ourselves. So if we use our doubts and questions as motivations to learn, study, understand, and be satisfied, they can be quite useful. We can even think of them as blessings in disguise. Blessings in disguise. Thanks. I hope to hear from you about your thoughts and experiences. If any of you have a Borderlands column story you want to share with somebody that a Borderlands call, let me know. Write something up about you. just send me an email at jeff@eburton.com. Go to my website for those who wonder. Just contact me through that. Thank you.
Jeff is the bomb, brothers and sisters. He's helped people quietly for 20 years to navigate the emotionally and spiritually charged waters of the borderlands. We're lucky to have had him for such a long time. So doubt. Talking about doubt in a Mormon context has changed drastically over the past 5 years. I don't know if you've noticed. And I'll have to admit, the change really caught me off guard. It actually undermined one of my most basic assumptions about Mormons. See, my entire life, it seemed that when a general authority would proclaim something, I could count on the majority of Mormons, the Orthodox members, to line up and support it. You know, whether it was to campaign for Proposition 8 in California, or for girls to wear only one pair of earrings. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Do you remember when the church posted a photo of Russell Nelson getting his COVID vaccination? I thought, and probably he thought, that the Orthodox Mormons would say, hey, look, a prophet of God is getting his vaccination. It must be a good thing. But that's not really what happened. We saw this huge backlash with a bunch of people who I was used to saying he's a prophet of God, saying, oh, he was acting as a fallible man in this case. And then, if you really wanted some entertainment, did you see the way that the church news website Facebook page blew up when they congratulated the new president for getting elected? It was astonishing. So the question in my mind is, what happened? How could the church's most reliable support base suddenly go so rogue? According to a recent study, most Americans now put their political identity ahead of their religious identity. So what that means is that political leaders have more sway over most Americans' thoughts and behaviors than their ecclesiastical leaders do. This shift has destabilized everybody, but I think it has especially destabilized the LDS general authorities. Because for the past 60 years, they've been used to conservative Mormons, far and away the largest part of the church body, putting their religious identity first. So it was Mormonism that directed their political beliefs and their conservatism. But that's no longer the case. Now politics is directing their Mormonism. It's kind of as if Mormons, conservative Mormons suddenly, boy, I just lost my place. I should have overcome my vanity and worn my glasses. It's almost as if conservative Mormons are becoming teenagers, finally, rebelling against the church's authority. So from one point of view, this is really fun to watch. The church has made political conservatism almost gospel truth. And it's really interesting to see conservatism suddenly turning on the church so publicly. And in a quiet part of my heart, I think the church kind of deserves it. But it also completely changes how Mormonism works. It used to be so easy to know how to communicate with each other. You can encounter someone that you'd never met before, and in just a few minutes, you could realize that they were Mormon, and you could fall into this comfortable, complex interaction using shared ideas and culture. But with this shift from the primacy of religious identity to the primacy of political identity, that shared value base is becoming narrower and narrower. So now to say I'm a Mormon means much less than to say something like I'm politically conservative. It's the political worldview that is all-encompassing now, rather than the religious worldview. Conservatism is driving Mormons rather than Mormonism driving Mormons. So, Mormonism, it's just the car's body now. It's actually conservatism that is the engine and the driver. And that throws us, in particular, as Mormons, for a loop, because we Sunstone people are used to being the doubters. We're used to sitting in the chapel, in a chapel full of believers. And it wasn't always a comfortable role, but we felt like it was an important one. We need to be the ones to question the majority discourse. We're the salt that makes that gives the congregation its savor. We're the yeast that leavens the loaf. But the problem is, as Jeff just pointed out, we aren't the only doubters anymore. In fact, we're suddenly surrounded by doubters. People that we once thought we were the believers, people that we liked to play contrast to. The only thing is, they aren't our kind of doubters. They believe in this multitude of things that seem outrageous to us. It's kind of like the Mormon language has been confounded. And none of us know how to talk to each other anymore. We almost wish that we could go back to the good old days when it was us against the ward, instead of every person in the ward saying, low here, low there. And it's at this point that we realize what kind of community Mormonism has been for so long. We've been a community held together by authority. So dissent could be squashed by a prophet making a pronouncement, or by an apostle giving a talk in general conference, or even by the newsroom issuing a statement, or even the classroom manual saying something like, this was the bane of my life, do not bring any supplemental materials into the lesson. But what that means was our unity was maintained by a chain of command. And it worked to a greater or lesser extent. But now that chain of command has been broken. The authority has been diluted. And we're finding out that without that authority, our community is eroding very quickly. We're finding out that we don't know how to be a community without authority. We have to actually now become a real community. And we haven't been trained for this at all. How do Mormons become a cohesive community without strong authority? To me, it's something we have to learn really quickly. Otherwise, politics is going to disperse us. So again, the dispersion of Mormonism might actually sound like a great thing to some people. But I want to suggest that Mormon meetings, especially Sunday school, Relief Society, and priesthood meetings, are actually some of the last face-to-face meeting places that people attend on a regular basis. It's the last place where we can encounter people that aren't necessarily in our affinity groups. It's a place where people actually come willing to talk about important things. In my opinion, there are huge possibilities in Mormon discussion spaces, though I will definitely admit we rarely use them. They're kind of the last places where we can still talk. Most everywhere else has been taken over by social media, which, as we've seen over the past decade, have a lot of significant drawbacks in both communication and community building. So with all this in mind, I would like to redefine doubt in a way that I think is much more useful to our current situation. Most of the time, we think about doubt in a context of concepts. In other words, we doubt that a particular concept or idea is true. We want to investigate its validity. And this has been really useful to the world for a long time. But I want to suggest that for the past few years, it's become much less useful. Because conceptual doubt is only useful when people are connected. When we're connected, we're more interested in the outcome of an investigation arising from doubt than we are in how it will affect our identity or our power. So for example, when a good friend doubts something you say, it's much easier to take that doubt seriously than if an enemy doubts something you say. If a friend doubts you, you know that they are also offering to support you as you investigate their doubt. Whereas if an enemy doubts you, you suspect that they're probably trying to hurt you or embarrass you. So what that means is the more connected we are, the more we have friends, the more we feel like we're in a supportive community, the more useful conceptual doubt becomes. I want to get us to that place. And that is why conceptual doubt is so unhelpful right now. We don't feel connected anymore. We feel like the people who doubt us could only be our enemies. And if someone doesn't share our concepts, we feel like they can't possibly be a friend. Now, again, Mormonism is guilty of teaching this kind of thinking. If someone leaves Mormonism, they usually lose all their Mormon friends. They may even be looked upon as evil because those relationships were built on Mormon concepts. But as we can see, those concepts are quickly eroding. In our current situation, I think if we want to maintain the community, relationships, not concepts, need to come first. And to do that, I propose that we learn a new kind of doubt. So here's a scenario. You're sitting in Sunday school and someone says something that you don't think is historically or doctrinally accurate. Instead of saying to yourself or to them, I doubt that that is true, you say to yourself, I doubt I know why they said that. I doubt I know what brought them to that thought. I doubt I know what need that concept addresses in them. And I doubt I know what other directions that person might go in further conversation. So the difference between those questions is, instead of doubting the surface concept, the thing that they said, instead of identifying the person with that concept, we are doubting that we understand the person as a person. Now, this is a difficult leap to make because it's almost taken for granted these days that we identify first and foremost with our beliefs. That's the way we work in the world, whether they're religious or political. So you say, I'm a Mormon, or I'm a Democrat. Take a look at your Facebook feed. What do the majority of your friends post most of the time? Usually material supporting or derogating a particular idea or group. At least 80% of my Facebook feed, I scrolled through it one day, looks like that. The persona of my family and my friends is filtered usually through politics or religion. And since social media is the way that most of us interact with one another right now, we tend to identify each other primarily as political or religious entities. And what that means is that we are constantly seeing only the surface aspects of them. And that when we react to that aspect, a surface aspect of us is responding to a surface aspect of them. And that is not a relationship. As I've been arguing, relationship is what we need most right now. To be in a relationship, you have to go deeper than surface political or religious concepts. And in order to do that, you have to be very practiced at doubting that these surface aspects are the person. You have to doubt that a relationship can be cultivated through those aspects. What people say is not them. This is really difficult to do. We're really used to conducting relationships along lines of affinity. It's uncomfortable when we know that we disagree with someone religiously or politically. I feel like there's a landmine waiting to destroy my relationship with this person. And usually I feel like I have to fix that thing in that person. And then I realize if I'm always trying to fix the thing in the other person, I'm also worrying that they're trying to fix something in me. And so we feel like the relationship can only be stable when we finally agree. One more time, Mormonism is totally guilty of teaching this kind of thinking. For example, in the Come Follow Me manual a few weeks ago, one of the headings read, "We can follow the guidance of the Holy Ghost as we defend our beliefs." And in another week, one question asked, "Why do we sometimes hesitate to share our testimony with others?" So essentially, what those questions were doing was talking about someone who doesn't agree with us as if they were someone who needed to be set on the right track, as someone whose value is in their perception of truth. And that's the way most of us conduct our relationships. Either we get together with people we agree with and rehearse our beliefs, or we try to persuade the unsympathetic person to the validity of our beliefs. I want to propose that we actually have a greater opportunity to cultivate relationships and therefore make better use of conceptual doubt when we disagree. Because see, when we agree, we don't work very hard when we converse. We just talk about why we're right. Think about it. Whenever you get together with friends, you go over how dumb the other guy is and how smart you guys are. We just talk about why we're right, and therefore we don't make any progress. We just have a great time going around in circles. And this is why we'd rather stick with the people we agree with. We like the circle. But as we frequently see when people leave Mormonism, if someone leaves the circle, they also lose their so-called relationships with the other people in the circle. So it's not really a relationship. It's some people who happen to be traveling in the same direction. In other words, our lives are made up of relationships that aren't really relationships. But at the same time, it's really difficult to talk with people we differ with politically or religiously. We've had those frustrating conversations where we just can't seem to get through to the other person. All the arguments that sounded great when we were talking in circles with our friends suddenly don't seem to fly. We're trying so hard to be reasonable, but it seems that we just don't share a similar premise. And we eventually lose hope of making any progress, meaning, progress in our direction. And we give up and we write the other person off as obstinate, stupid, or dishonest. I actually had a conversation like this a week ago. It was with a friend. Somehow we got on the subject of affirmative action. And she couldn't see one single thing good about affirmative action. And I tried these delicate ways of reframing it for her, but none of them worked. And I could tell that we weren't going to get anywhere. So I did something that was kind of scary. After she told me, "Look, I have very strong political convictions. These are part of me." Then I told her, "I used to be that way too. And something happened to me that destabilized me." And I took a deep breath and I told her that I had a transgender daughter and that her transition had made me re-examine all of my religious and political assumptions. And it was like flipping a light switch. Suddenly, the conversation opened up. Instead of us immediately claiming right or left-leaning approaches, we actually both started looking for creative ways to encounter the subject. We actually acknowledged the various groups that were involved with the issue, and we empathized with all of them. And by the end of the conversation, she was actually expressing compassion for transgender people. And I would never have expected her of harboring this compassion. I could tell that she was sincere. And here's the most interesting part. When we got to the end of the conversation, our relationship was stronger than it had been at the beginning of the conversation. And yes, we have continued to talk since then. So I looked back over the conversation to figure out what had happened to start that shift. And I realized that when I brought the conversation into the present, when I brought us to a place where I was honestly struggling, where different values were pulling me in different directions, where my heart and my head were trying to make something make sense of something that they had never encountered before, where I didn't have an answer, that's where it opened up. There's a funny thing about that space. It's a space of doubt. When I brought us into a space of doubt, we could finally converse. But it was also a space of belief. It was a state of doubt because I was questioning. It was a space of belief because I was putting trust in another person to accompany me. When I brought myself into that space, we were no longer two political entities conflicting. We were two human beings with hearts and minds working together. So John Kessler, who's often here at the symposium, talks about how the best way to interact with polarities is to transcend and include them both. And that, it seems to me, is where we were going in this conversation. We were transcending and including right and left ways of thinking. But in order to do this, I had to let go of my preferred polarity and honestly go exploring. I couldn't use my question just as a way of luring my friend into seeing things my way. I couldn't use it to get sympathy. I had to actually enter the doubting space, even though, or perhaps even especially because, it put my identity into question. When my boundaries became permeable, her boundaries did the same thing. And I think the other reason why it worked so well was it was because we were both entering a creative space. We weren't defending ourselves anymore. We weren't trying to maintain order. We weren't trying to gather power. We were trying to encounter something that neither of us had an answer for. And the fact that we had such different views of the world, this actually made us more useful to each other. We had more to offer the conversation than two people who have similar views. Our differences were an asset. So to enter into these kinds of conversations where we connect, where we're creative, where our differences are an asset, it seems to me that we need to find a way to inhabit the present, to enter into the parts of our lives that are still too big for us, where a conviction just won't cover it, where our hearts and our heads reach but can't grasp, where, in fact, we would benefit from a companion. Because then we've transcended and included both doubt and belief with our conversation partner. We've moved into a creative space where relationship can be forged. The motivation for our doubt is not correction, but connection. So, what does that mean for Mormon Sunday classes? You knew I'd get back here eventually. It means, I hate to say it, going and getting ready for them in ways that we're probably not used to. First, I think that it means that we need to follow Elder Uchtdorf's counsel to, say it with me, folks, doubt our doubts. But what that means to me in this context is that most of the time, my first reaction to any lesson or class comments is to think about how it could be wrong. But that's just the surface me, playing with the surface lesson or the surface comment. I need to doubt that those doubts will help. I need to look further than those to a place where doubt and belief are transcended and included. If I stick with just doubt or just belief, I'm stuck. So it takes a while, but I think that the best way to get ready to make Sunday's classes a creative, connecting experience is to spend time beforehand finding a way to bring your response into the present. We all know that you're not going to get anywhere talking about something that you or other people have already made up their minds about. The only way a creative relationship building conversation can start is if one person makes themselves permeable, if they bring themselves into the present, where questions are still big and unanswered, and especially where their heart is tender and their mind is questioning, where you both doubt and believe. And this takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of doubt because I am always drawn to the spaces where I feel like I have control. I want to preach. It's fun. You want to show why your model of reality is correct. I don't particularly want to come into the present because it's chaos waiting to be formed. And it's painful there. It threatens my identity. And I don't know what I'm going to be like when I come out the other side. When I arrive in the present, I have to trust people to be there with me. And that's a hard kind of trust to put out. But I believe that eventually this presentness and this permeableness will start to form connections and community with the people around me. The kinds of connections that don't rely on shared concepts, rather the kind that rely on shared humanity, the kind that don't erode when authority fails, the kind that makes people's differences into an asset, the kind that launch our creativity. Now, I do want to point out one thing. I think that these kinds of these kind of connection building conversations can really only happen in face-to-face settings. It's almost impossible to do it on social media. Writing is an anemic means of communication when you compare it to face-to-face interaction. It's missing eye contact, it's missing body language, it's missing vocal intonation, the energy that can flow between two people, the possibility of questioning to make sure that you understand what they're saying. So it's true that I inject writing into my Sunday class face-to-face interactions because I literally write down what I want to say beforehand, and then I have to go and deliver it in person and hope that my memory holds out. But that's one more reason why I think it's worth keeping the LDS Sunday meetings well-attended and robust. Face-to-face interactions is one of the few things that can convince us in our gut and in our heart that we are connected with each other. And the amazing thing is that could happen every week. Where else does something like this happen? It's weird to say, but I think that Sunday classes can save us if we're willing to put the work into being present in them. One more caveat. I'm not always this optimistic. More often than not, I leave a Sunday school class feeling like an hour of my life has just been sucked away. It takes so much for me to not only put in that hour or so to prepare something to say, some way of bringing myself into the present, but then, worst of all, to insert myself into the conversation with real people surrounding me that I don't know all that well, and then open myself up. I admit that I'm kind of counting on Jesus's promise that when 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, he is there also. You with me, Jesus? We'll see. All right, I'm done. How much time do we have left?
We have 7 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take your questions now.
You might be depending upon how loud this is.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Do we have any questions right here? We do have one online that I thought was a very good question.
Yeah.
Okay. This person asks, in recent history, the brethren seem to have softened their rhetoric about the absolute negativity of doubt. With this change in political voices pushing back against leadership about their doubt in their conservatism, do you think there will be a retrenchment in stating doubt is bad? Quite the question.
That's a good question. It would be really interesting to watch the church start leaning left. I want to be around for that. We used to do that early on. We were lefties. I would say that the brethren are so destabilized by their loss of authority recently. They're so not used to that what I heard in the last 2 conferences was the general authority saying we need to be people with each other. we need to listen to each other. We need to make room for stories from everybody. And I think that they know that we have to be a real community that is connected by connectedness instead of concepts. Because I heard a lot less doctrine this time around. I don't know if you guys agree with that. And I heard a lot more about people and connection. So I think that they've realized that politics bites and that it's especially bitey right now. And that Jesus actually had a really good idea. Love one another as I have loved you. How about you, Jeff? What do you think? Come on up. Okay.
Do we have any other questions here?
That's more of a comment, so I don't know.
Go for it.
Dan's always willing to take me down.
Yeah.
Take me down, Dan.
I've always had a very complicated relationship when you discuss doubt. And even though doubt was a wonderful part of my process, it's not a fun process. And I really appreciate you talking about the turmoil and everything, Jeff. But doubt, when you talk about religion and faith and soul stuff, it's just so heady that it's not even the same category as religion and spirituality and all those kinds of things. And so, while I think a lot of people, they'll say, I'm a nuanced Mormon. You know, I figured out the way to nuance that belief so that I can then have the shared beliefs with others. Versus, I've not only doubted with my head, but I've sought a way to be connected with a source that is the source of religion, that is the source of the spiritual impulse and all those kinds of things. And then it's easier from that point to move into the space again that you're talking about, the relational space. Because then you're not performing, you're not pretending, you're not, so careful because you're just yourself. And that's where the relationship's going to come. So if there is a question, and it's more for Jeff, I know you work in this one space, but I think we should really acknowledge, and maybe you do, so come up and tell me if you do, that it's a category mistake to treat religion just, with the mind and whether it's rational beliefs and concepts and all that stuff. So. Okay.
That actually reminds me of a pivotal moment in my life when a psychologist wrote in a group I was in, men don't want sex as much as they want intimacy. He says, men think that sex is the thing they want most. It's not true. They want intimacy. I thought he was insane. But as I've thought about it, and as I've grown older, I've realized, he's right. The nourishment of connection far surpasses any kind of pleasure, and I want to connect that with how Mormons interact with the world. And I would say Mormons think that the thing that they want the most in the world is to be right, but what they really want is to be connected to the source. And that's a totally different thing, though they can go hand in hand. But yeah, being right is way not as important as being connected. And I think we're really starting to feel that as a country and as a church. We need to learn to be connected. And to me, doubt is a huge part of that. That space of doubt and belief transcended and included. You got anything else, Jeff? All right.
Thank you.
Oh, they clapped for me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Can we give a round of applause for our presenters? That was wonderful. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for making the time to attend this session. And yeah, thanks. Thanks again.
Thanks for running it.
Yeah, no problem.